Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And oh my gosh, we're going to have so much fun today. We're going to be talking about tequila. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about investing in tequila and how this wonderful young entrepreneur by the name of Samuel Gordon has been doing this and making a very wonderful business out of this. So welcome, Samuel. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Deb. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Perfect. I love it. Well, for those who couldn't tell, we have a Scotsman on our program. That's always near and dear to my heart. I tell people if I really could live somewhere else, I would go in Scotland. We visited, and the whole time I was going around going, "Ooh, all these people look like me." And so I absolutely loved it. And that is, of course, where my family is from. And so, this is going to be such a great conversation. But let me tell people just a little bit about you, Samuel, and then we'll jump into this. So Samuel Gordon is the co-founder and CEO of Gordon Private Whiskey Clients, and he's not your typical Scotsman. While he does hail from the land of Scotch whiskey, Samuel has ventured beyond the Highlands to become a trailblazer in the cask investment market. Starting with his deep roots in Scotch, he expanded into Irish and Japanese whiskeys, building wealth for his clients through carefully curated portfolios of aging spirits. But Samuel's journey doesn't stop there. He has now added a twist to tradition by offering investments in the world's fastest growing premium spirit, 100% blue agave tequila. Yes, you heard that right. A Scotsman is selling tequila. So again, Samuel, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Well, I always like to know how my guests got to where they are today. And I'm guessing you have a pretty fascinating story. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, you could say so. I'll go right back. So, I left school when I was 18.
Okay.
I went traveling for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And once I'd stopped traveling, I didn't do any school or college in the US or university in the UK, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I went straight into employment.
Okay.
And specifically started working for an independent financial advisor.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing your typical, wealth management, stocks,
Mm-hmm.
bonds, cash,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of investments. And I did that for about 18 months.
Mm.
However, I then met, when I was in my IFA role, I met an entrepreneur who specialized in whiskey,
Mm-hmm.
primarily, various different whiskey businesses. And he had the idea to set up a Scotch whiskey investment company. Mm-hmm. That time. Wasn't really a thing at that point, certainly mm-hmm. not casks. So I really had no qualifications at all at the time, to be honest. I was very young. I was 21 or 22 mm-hmm. years of age, very, very young, but obviously a lot of passion, mm-hmm. a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy. So yeah, we started up the first ever Scotch whiskey cask investment company mm-hmm. in Europe. And initially, I was a salesperson. I was the first salesperson in the company. As time went on, as we grew the company, we expanded from our presence in Scotland across to Europe, then across to Asia, to Singapore, Hong Kong. And yeah, personally, I stepped up into a sales director role and was there for about 3 or 4 years, eventually a managing director role for the UK, Europe, and Asia. And then our final step in that journey was the expansion into the US. So we then expanded the business in the US. I took on the project as the president for the company. And we took Scotch whiskey cask investment to the US as a regulated investment for the very first time. I was there for about 18 months and I'd spent about 8 years with that company total at that time. And then I left them about 12 months ago now to set up my own company, which is where I'm at now, which is Gordon Private Whiskey Clients. We, of course, are doing whiskey. So Scotch, of course, Japanese, Irish. We have diversified into Irish. It's not something I did previously. I had done Scotch, I had done Japanese. And most recently, as you know, Deb, we have diversified into tequila as well. How did that happen?
Yeah, because that's a pretty different spirit.
Yes, it is. It is. You know, myself and my co-founder, Mark Johannes, so we've worked together for many years. We like to innovate. We consider ourselves pioneers. And we've always been looking at other opportunities in global spirit markets. And that research over about a 12-month period led us to tequila. I have since spent probably the last 4 months, over the last 12 months across in Mexico. I've completely fallen in love with the people. I've completely fallen in love with just the culture generally, but of course tequila as a product as well. So yeah, we took our first steps into the market about 6 weeks ago now, just over a month.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And we have just launched the world's first tequila cask investment program. And yeah, that's it. Here we are today. Now,
I love it.
Alongside tequila for the first time.
Very fun. Well, as you know, I interviewed someone about Scotch cask investment. We both know Taylor Costa Van Putten, and talked to him and was fascinated because I had absolutely no idea that people would invest in a cask. So explain that to us, because I think that, we're thinking, okay, we buy stocks, we buy bonds, we invest in a company. How on earth do you invest in a cask? Not casket, folks. Cask. A tequila cask, a whiskey cask.
How do you invest in a tequila cask? Yeah. You're obviously investing in a real asset. So when we say the cask, we don't just mean the oak cask itself.
So I'm not just buying that barrel.
No, exactly. You're buying a barrel, in this case, full of tequila.
Okay.
Now, the beauty of investing in barrels or casks versus bottles, for example, is really the aging process. So that is where the spirit interacts with the oak cask, very similar to wine, of course, whiskey, tequila. It interacts with the cask over time to age the spirit. And what this typically does is it rounds out the spirits and tends to give it a more complex character.
Right, it picks up the oakiness.
Yeah, especially if
it's probably not the right technical term, but
I mean, it technically is if it's let's call it a virgin cask or a fresh cask. It's not had any spirit in it before. But for example, it's very common to use a cask that has been seasoned or previously matured some other kind of spirit in it. So be that a bourbon.
Right.
And you empty out the bourbon and you put tequila in the bourbon cask, and then that tequila is going to carry some of those bourbon aromas.
Because that wood absorbed some of that bourbon.
100%. Exactly. The same with an ex-wine cask or a sherry cask or a port or a rum. There are so many different ex-casks that you can use. And then, yes, the tequila in this case would then take on some of the characteristics of the yes, as you said, but also some of those unique characters from the previous spirit or wine. So ultimately, what you get over time is a higher quality spirit. And that is the beauty of aging in cask. You're buying a product that is completely fresh. In tequila terms, that's what we call blanco tequila. So that is typically unaged tequila, but can be a maximum of 2 months.
Okay.
So you're buying your blanco tequila, it's in the cask. And if you keep that tequila for just 1 year, then got what they call an añejo tequila, which is a completely different product. If you then keep that for a further 2 years, you've then got an extra añejo. So añejo is Spanish for aged. Extra añejo is Spanish for extra aged. Okay, so through the power of cask, you're able to really transform one product into another product. And typically, you're creating a higher quality product through that process.
Right.
One of the other really key things, Deb, is that throughout that journey, the quality doesn't just get higher, but the scarcity also increases as well. And the demand increases.
Right.
Definitely is the case with tequila. So what that can bring for investors is higher values.
Right. And it is that time that is what builds that value. I have family who own a vineyard in New Mexico. Had a great time going and visiting. And of course, we had to do the tour. They do now, this is wine. They do none in wooden casks. They use the big metal containers. And there's obviously they can produce a lot more. They produce it more quickly, all of those various things. But, you're not going to have, say, that oaky bouquet or, all of those various things that you would get from it. See, I kind of know what I'm talking about. But, and we asked and they said, they chose to go with the faster route as opposed to, and like you said, some of these, especially with things like wine, you have them in their casks and their barrels for many, many, many years. And you don't have that happening, obviously, with the big metal containers.
Does it age in the metal container? Does it just sit?
It just sits. And I don't remember how long they typically leave it in there. It's kind of like it goes in and it does its thing and becomes wine. But it is a much, much more quick process, obviously. And because it's just, they can turn an awful lot of product every year. And so they chose to go with quantity as opposed now, I shouldn't say as opposed to quality because they've won awards, they've done all sorts of things, but it is a very different product than something that has been done in a wooden cask.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's really key, Deb, because it's almost reversed with tequila. So if we stick with whiskey and tequila for the example here,
right? Because wine gets pretty complicated.
I just don't know too much about wine, to be honest. So yeah, tequila, whiskey.
Okay.
With whiskey, investors are typically going to buy what's called a new make whiskey. Okay. So it is fresh off the copper still
Mm-hmm.
into an oak cask, as we're talking about now. And an investor is then going to buy that product at that point. It's called make whiskey. Okay. Now, an investor in whiskey is really going to, I would always have advised, and I always do advise investors in whiskey to look at a 10-year term.
Okay.
Okay. Because really, that's where the scarcity point is, past that age. Even better, past the age of 12, 15, 18, going into the 20s. That's
So it's
when
a
you've got
long-term investment.
Correct. That's when you've got a really scarce asset on your hands. And obviously, with the premiumization of the whiskey category, that's really where you see the greatest demand happening now, or the highest growth rates, certainly in the whiskey markets, are within those aged categories, 12, 15, 18 plus. People are drinking less, right? People are drinking less. They're drinking less, but they're drinking higher quality. They're spending.
They're enjoying it more.
Exactly. So the point I'm making is you're really looking at a 10-year term with whiskey. One of the unique aspects of tequila is it's a 3-year term.
Okay.
Maximum. Because you've only got 4 age categories with tequila. Okay. You've got Blanco, as mentioned before, 0 to 2 months. Reposado, 2 to 11 months. Reposado is Spanish for well rested. So that's your kind of intermediary category. It's actually the hardest one to do. Whilst we're here talking about casks and the influence of casks, the Reposado category is very difficult, Deb, because people who drink Reposado, they want the agave forward character. They want to still taste the character of the agave. They want that to be front and center, like they did with a Blanco, without any cask influence at all. Okay. Whereas with Reposado, people want that agave forward character, but they also want a bit of wood influence in there as well. But obviously the oak cask is very powerful. It's very, very difficult to get the balance with a Reposado.
Right.
Okay, because you want to have a bit of wood influence. You also want to have the agave character very prominent. It should be very forward. Okay. So, it's definitely the most difficult category to do is Reposado. But then you've got your añejo category, which is anywhere between 1 and 3 years. And then you've got your añejo category, which is anything above 3 years. There are very few brands that do anything above 3 years. It's a very small market. Very little tequila is left to age past a Reposado. It's very difficult to find bottles, retail bottles, certainly casks that people are willing to sell within the añejo or extra añejo category. So an investor has the opportunity to buy Blanco, keep it for 1 year, sell an añejo, or keep it for 3 years and sell an extra añejo. So that maturation process that we talk about with the whiskey, where you're looking at anywhere above 10 years, it's much shorter with tequila.
So now, is somebody actually buying the specific cask? So, or is it more they're investing in it's not a winery. Where do you make tequila? What's that called?
Well, it's called the distillery.
Okay, distillery, right. So are they buying specific casks? So like, they bought 5 casks, or are they investing more in the distillery?
Really good question. First of all, the proper technical term for a distillery in tequila is tequilera.
I can't say that.
Yeah.
I'll stick with distillery.
So yeah, distillery tequilera, same thing. Are they buying the cask or are they buying into the distillery? They are not buying a share in the distillery. They are
Mhm.
not buying any ownership stake in the
Mhm.
distillery. They are buying a real asset. So once they complete the purchase
Mhm.
with us,
Mhm.
they then take ownership of casks.
Right. But it stays there. It's not that it goes somewhere else, like to their garage.
Absolutely, yes. So the same as with Scotch,
Mhm.
all of the distilleries in
Mhm.
tequila have government bonded warehouses
Mhm.
on site. So anybody who buys a cask of tequila
Mhm.
would have their tequila stored for
Mhm.
them in those warehouses.
Mhm. And then maintained. I mean, which is the important thing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that the whole security maintenance aspect was something that certainly outside the US, it's not such a common thing in the US because you've got that close geographical proximity to
Mhm.
Mexico. There's a
Mhm.
lot more familiarity there.
Mhm.
But certainly in the US, certainly outside the US, Deb, the perception of Mexico, very volatile,
Mhm.
unstable,
Right.
less security generally compared
Mhm.
to Scotland.
Mhm.
And it's very fair.
Mhm.
It's very fair.
Mhm.
There are a lot of, or there certainly are parts of Mexico
Mhm.
that you would consider quite volatile,
Mhm.
same as any country,
Right.
right?
There are places in Atlanta that I do not go to.
I've only been there on a stopover before. I've never been to Atlanta, but I have heard that
Mhm.
before. Yeah.
And they're probably perfectly fine and perfectly safe, but it's like, no, no.
To be honest, it's no different to Scotland. Some
Right.
parts of Mexico,
Hmm.
don't go.
Hmm.
Don't go.
Hmm. Oh yeah, we wandered around Edinburgh going, I don't think we're supposed to be here.
Yeah. Edinburgh City is beautiful, but
Hmm.
yes, some of the outskirts are
Hmm.
a bit precarious, let's say. So where I was going with that was they are stored in these
Hmm.
warehouses. Okay. They are fully insured.
Hmm.
So anybody who owns a cask in there, they are covered pretty much against any loss or
Hmm.
destruction of the asset
Hmm.
through no faults of their own.
Hmm.
So they have got an insurance policy in place. We also have something quite unique set up with the distilleries there, which is a warranty.
Hmm.
So they warrant any non-insurable risks
Hmm.
for investors. So non-insurable risks are spoilage.
Okay.
It's
Hmm.
not a science.
Hmm.
Maturing spirits, it's more of
Right.
an art. So spoilage can happen.
Hmm.
Leakage, it's an old cask.
Hmm.
It's not, as we were
Right.
talking with
It's
wine.
not those metal containers, and even a metal container can spring a leak.
Exactly, exactly. So there are asset risks. However, yes, anything that is not insured
Hmm.
is warranted by
Okay.
the
Hmm.
so things like leakage, spoilage.
Hmm.
More interestingly, though, the time that I've spent there, I'm actually relocating
Hmm.
now, so I will probably spend about 6 months of the year in
Ah.
Mexico moving forward.
Hmm.
Yes, I'll be based in Guadalajara, one of
Hmm.
the main cities, very close to Jalisco, which
Hmm.
contains a small town of Tequila, which is where
Hmm.
all of the tequila comes from, and
Hmm.
most of the distilleries are within that Jalisco region.
Hmm.
But the industry itself is extremely well regulated,
Hmm.
extremely secure.
Hmm.
Tequila is a $16.5 billion a year.
Right. So the Mexican government's going to make sure that it's protected.
Exactly, exactly. And you've got various, regulatory
Hmm.
bodies, government regulatory bodies,
Hmm.
the CRT, which is the Consejo Regulador de Tequila.
Hmm.
So they are the governing body, if you like, of the tequila
Hmm.
industry. And they very much oversee the whole process from the
Hmm.
cultivation, the raw materials
Hmm.
like the agave,
Hmm.
all the way through the standards for the production process, the aging process, obviously key for our investors, securing that environment, sealing the casks, all the way through to bottling and marketing practices. They oversee that full cycle, if you like. And you've also got the denomination of origin as well. So this is the really crucial thing, because we're always looking at other opportunities in global spirit markets. Okay. The denomination of origin is critical to making any spirit category investable. What the denomination of origin does is it protects the authenticity and the quality of an industry. It's the same as Scotch, or it's the same as champagne, for example.
Right. Especially, you know that if it is champagne, it was produced in a certain place.
Exactly.
Champagne.
Exactly.
I almost speak French.
That's basically French. Yeah, that's basically French. So yeah, the denomination of origin is crucial. That's kind of the overarching controls, if you like, of the tequila industry, is that denomination of origin, and then the CRT oversees everything within that. So again, it's a very rational concern for potential investors to have. Being there, being on the ground, basing myself there now for the majority of the year, certainly half the year, being able to be embedded in the industry in the way I am and see the practices, see the processes. I can transfer that confidence onto any investor considering the asset class.
I love it. So aside from somebody who's doing this kind of, their own little hobby thing, where else is tequila produced, or is it all produced in Mexico? Is that part of the fascination with it? It's only produced in Mexico.
It's only produced in Mexico. Yeah. And it's only produced in 5 very small regions.
Okay. Because of the plant.
Yeah. So the plant itself can only be cultivated and harvested within those 5 regions. Exactly. So yes, that's right. It's only in Mexico, and it's only within 5 very small regions in Mexico. The main one is Jalisco. That's the most densely populated region for tequila. Think of it as Speyside for Scotch whiskey, for example. Very much the mecca of tequila, Jalisco. And as I mentioned earlier, it also contains the town of Tequila, which is where Jose Cuervo in the 1700s, I understand, I think it was the 1720s, and Mr. Souza, they set up the first ever distilleries, the first ever taquilleras was within that region. So all the production is basically centered around there. And that really keeps things scarce, to be honest, Deb. You've got an industry that is so globally recognized, so in demand, but it's a very finite production.
Right.
It can only be used in a very small region.
Right. Yeah. And I find that fascinating, because I mentioned I live in Georgia, and there is a Vidalia onions can only by federal law be grown in Georgia. If they're grown, if it's grown anywhere else, it is not a Vidalia onion. Because which I just find that's fascinating. I'm like, and so if somebody says, oh, hey, we've got Vidalia onions in Colorado, well, no, only if they brought them from Georgia, because that is part of this process, is they're protecting it. When I talked with Taylor, one of the things that I learned, and I kind of knew this, was like with Scotch, whiskey is spelled different, and that spelling indicates part of where it came from. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah. I'm trying to think back to why that happened, because it was the influence there is obviously, so the Irish technically were the first country.
Oh, no.
I know, it pains me to say it, but it was the Irish. And back then, which would have been in the 1300s, 1400s, right about then, they spelt it SKY, not the same way they spell it now.
With the EY.
Correct. And the Scots inherited that. So the Scots ultimately took that on. And you also saw, because the Japanese learned their tricks from the Scots, the Japanese also took on the SKY. But there was a change in Ireland that happened. I can't remember when this was, but it was before whiskey really became big in the US. And there's a thing called pot still Irish whiskey, and there's a thing called column still Irish whiskey. So single pot still. And the pot still Irish whiskey makers consider themselves higher quality than the column still Irish whiskey. And they wanted a way to differentiate themselves in the market. So they stuck an I between the K and the Y. And that's how they differentiated themselves. And then, of course, the entire market kind of adopted that for the Irish. The Irish had the biggest influence on America in terms of their whiskey consumption, certainly in the early days. So that's why really you see this difference. You know, you've got the Americans and the Irish, they've got the E, and the Scots and the Japanese, they've just got the KY. So yeah, it is interesting, definitely.
Well, and yeah, because, you know, for a long time, because I was not a connoisseur, I just thought, well, hey, it's a typo, right? You know, it never occurred to me that it actually differentiated where it was produced. You know, and I thought that was very cool when I actually figured that out. And I probably, you know, I probably knew it for a while, but of course, when we toured distilleries in Scotland, they really made a point of, you know, pointing that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we have to remember how much heritage history is in these spirits. You know, Scotch has got a very rich heritage. Of course, Irish whiskey does as well. Bourbon's a bit more modern. American whiskey's a bit more modern, as is Japanese whiskey. But even tequila, you know, tequila goes back as far as...
Would have been Aztecs, wouldn't it, at least?
Yeah, well, it was the Aztecs that first started distilling or fermenting agave. So they first started fermenting agave. And that would have been in the 13 and 1400s. And they used a drink called pulpo, I think it was called, which was a very frothy, quite thick, fermented alcoholic beverage. It would have. But then when the Spanish conquistadors crossed to Mexico, I think in the 1600s, they brought across the distillation techniques.
So that was when they made it more of a true liquid.
Exactly. So they started distilling the fermented products that the Aztecs and the native people of Mexico had made. And they started distilling that. And that was when your first tequila style products started to become a thing. And obviously, the market has evolved significantly since then, over the 400 or 500 years. But yes, as with the Scots being very proud of Scotch whiskey, you've got exactly the same with tequila in Mexico. You know, that history, that heritage. When you're across in Mexico, and we take a lot of our investors across, so we want to really ingrain them in the industry, you know, allow them to go and see their casks, you know, when it's produced, you know, the sunny hills, the sunny lands of Mexico, experience the culture. You get the same from the Mexican people, from the people that work in the distilleries, you know, the craftsmanship, the skill.
Right. And multi-generation, I'm assuming, too.
100%. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I love it. Well, now, you know, we've piqued somebody's interest and they're thinking, this sounds interesting. Is this something that only millionaires can invest in? Or, you know, somebody who's got, you know, a little spare change that they're going to invest? what, kind of what is your typical investor?
Yeah.
Or is there a typical investor?
Look, I mean, this is a combination of two things. It's a combination of passion,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a combination of investment.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of people that invest with us, they've got an interest, they've got an understanding, they've got some exposure to tequila
Mm-hmm.
as a product.
Right. Because they're going to want to sample the product too.
Exactly, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But they've also, of course, got an intention of diversifying,
Mm-hmm.
protecting,
Mm-hmm.
growing wealth. So typically most people that we are working with, our clients, they've got that blend of
Mm-hmm.
both. Of course, we have some people that really just come across, they don't have any interest in tequila. Maybe they don't even like tequila. Maybe they just prefer cognac or
Mm-hmm.
whiskey. And they're just here from the investment.
Right. And it's a fascinating thing to be investing in.
Yeah, and our the data that we have, the industry data that we have, is very strong over the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody looking at it purely through that investment lens, in terms of a tool for diversification or an alternative asset, there's certainly a lot of potential benefits there for investors' portfolio, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Deb, it's a real blend of both.
Mm-hmm.
Typically you've got people, again, it might not be tequila, maybe they like just luxury, prestige assets. They want to buy those goods, those prestigious assets. They want to invest in high-end goods. So, tequila falls into that category. So it's very much a combination of both things.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody's thinking about this, how obviously we want them to talk to you, but, what type of research should they be doing? Is this something that they'd find written up in Fortune or Forbes, or, how are they going to research this?
Research is key. Doing your diligence is absolutely key. There is, of course, a lot of data, a lot of information out there online. Aside from our company and the content, the data that we put out that people can look to, it'll give them an understanding of, the market dynamics, the supply, the demand. And that's all out there, of course. When it comes to understanding the barrel program and ultimately how this specific opportunity works, yeah, this is something that if they follow us, our socials, go on our websites, find us up online somehow, they're going to be able to learn a lot more about the barrel program. We've got a team of consultants that, for anybody who is curious, anybody who wants to just really look at the market, understand the market, ask the right questions, we've got a team of consultants that are ready to guide potential investors through that process. So it's all out there. It's all public information. We've got a lot of information out there as a business on our website, on different websites. There's a lot of third-party information out there. But if somebody really wants to start looking into the market, speak with an expert. And of course, as I've said, we have consultants that can be on hand to guide anybody through that process.
Right. So I'm assuming that where they make their money, where they get their return on investment, is when the casks are sold. So is that kind of how that works? So there's really nothing until the casks are sold. I mean, they get updates and things, but there's nothing until that happens.
Yeah, it's 100% right. It's 100% right. They invest, again, it's either a 1-year term, a 3-year term. So they can say, I'm going to buy my Blanco today and I just want to invest for 1 year. that means they're going to be selling añejo.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to invest for 3 years, that means they're going to be selling extra añejo. Now, how we do it, Deb, is we fulfill orders for brands who require aged tequila to meet market requirements, to meet their market demand. So if we have a brand that says, I want 100 casks of extra añejo in August 2027, we will bring together a group of investors to invest in 100 casks of Blanco tequila as a 3-year investment. So they take ownership of those casks, and then at the end of that 3-year term, we then assist them with facilitating that sale to the brands, then bottle it for their market demand. So we handle that full process all the way from purchase, managing their account, providing them with market updates, keeping them engaged, all the way through to then actually selling the investment. And yes, they make their return at the end of the term. Right. They sell that.
So what I'm assuming a lot of people would do is they just kind of do a running thing. They might do 1 year and 3 years, and then they just keep investing. So that way they continually have hopefully a return on their investment.
Exactly. It's very similar to like a laddering strategy with bonds, for example. So yes, you're right. It's correct.
So I don't know that much about tequila, and of course we all know about Jose Cuervo, but how many brands are there? I mean, this is obviously it is very finite because it's only made in 5 counties, but how many different brands are out there?
Around about 2,800 brands.
Holy cow!
Yeah, but that's growing every year. That's growing every year.
So this is a lot of tequila that is produced every year.
Yeah, but the key thing is there's only 75 producers.
Okay.
So
this is a huge production for each one of those.
Exactly. Which is very, very difficult for them to meet those production requirements.
Right.
So again, the combination of the fact that it can only be produced in a very small part of Mexico, there's very limited producers that are producing it when you look at the overall demand. Also, it's the barriers to entry for distilleries is very high. There's a very stringent process to go through to get a license to produce for the industry via the CRT. So the combination of those two things keeps the market production, the supply available for market demands, very limited. Another really key limiting factor is that it takes 7 years to grow the blue agave plant. So if you think of whiskey, for example, you can grow barley, if we're talking about Scotch, corn for bourbon, grow a barley or corn in...
That's an annual production.
It's like 9 weeks or 12 weeks after August, right? I think. The agave plant, the blue Weber agave plant, takes a minimum of 7 years.
And that's if everything's perfect. The weather, all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And the plants have to pass quality checks with the CRT. They have to vet every plant. It's all registered. So you're right. It takes 7 years to grow, but then the regulations again control the quality. And yeah, that can also limit the supply even further. But again, the key thing that it has a 7-year growth cycle.
And then another 1 to 3 years.
Exactly. So you're looking at, if you're producing an extra añejo, you're looking at a 10-year production cycle all in, at the least, at the very, very least. So that makes it very difficult for the industry. It's another factor that makes it very difficult for the industry to keep supply in line with demand, especially sharp spikes in demand like we're
Right.
seeing. And of course, as demand continues to grow, Deb, simple supply demand economics, you typically see prices when you've got
Right.
that.
Prices are going to go when demand is up.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Do you see it expanding out of those 5 areas, or is it climate wise it can only grow there, or things like that? Is there a reason why it is just in those 5 areas?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I do not know.
I stumped the expert. My guess is that maybe it can because I mean you'd think if it could be grown elsewhere, it would be grown elsewhere, right? Because of demand. If you could grow it, you'd make more. I mean, hello, it's alcohol.
Saying, yeah. So I think your suggestion, your analysis could probably be right. And I do know that the lands of certainly Jalisco are famed for the soil is, again, I'm not an expert on this side of things, but because there's a lot of volcanic soil there, apparently it is ideal for harvesting the agave. But again, you've stumped me there. I don't know the answer to that question fully.
Right. Yeah, they must not be able to grow it elsewhere, or they would have. But yeah, that's just and you'd think they try and figure out how to do that, and I'm sure they probably are. But I mean, out of thousands of years, and they haven't been able to. There's clearly something magic going on.
Must be. There must be. Yeah. Yeah. So, it really does limit the supply, that factor. And really, when you consider, it's very, very difficult for these distilleries, even once they're able to produce the tequila, to be able to actually then age enough tequila to meet the demand for aged tequilas, because demand across the entire category is so high. It's very difficult for them to actually, even once they produce it and they've got their blanco, lay enough down, because demand for their blanco is so high, demand for their reposados. But it really is now, if you look at the data, Deb, so in 2014, demand was about $2.1 million, $2.1 billion. Okay. If you look at the demand last year for tequila, it was 16.5.
Oh, we drink a lot more.
It's
for a variety of reasons.
Which is funny because we're actually drinking less, right? But it's just lower volume, higher value spirits, certainly in the tequila category. By the year 2032, demand is expected to be $42.5 billion, according to. That's a compound annual growth rate of about 12% a year on year, next 8 years.
Which for an investment, that's pretty good. Now, obviously, it's not guaranteed and all that good stuff. We know all the disclaimers, but that's an amazing number.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it shows the market size, the size of the market, which obviously for any consumable asset like tequila or whiskey, the size of that market for you to then resell into is crucial. It's key, demand aspect. So yeah, it's a very positive indicator. But again, this growth is being driven by premiumization. So again, it's not that we're drinking more necessarily, we are, but when you compare it, really it's the value of the industry that's driving that growth rather than volume. And it's the demand for aged, high quality premium tequilas and extra añejo products. And yes, it's very, very difficult for the industry to keep up with that demand. And that's ultimately where our investors come in. You know, they're able to bridge the gap between the distilleries and the brands that require all of this aged tequila to meet that global demand.
So you mentioned that you're going to be living there and learning more about it. You're like, there's a wine sommelier. And so is there a special term for somebody who is the tequila master? I don't even know if that exists.
Yeah, I'm definitely not one yet. There is such a thing as a maestro taquilero or a maestro taquilero, which is kind of your master distiller if you're comparing it to Scotch. In terms of like a sommelier type thing, I don't know. I'm not familiar. But I've certainly met a lot of people who are extremely knowledgeable in the category. Some of our partners, the distilleries that we're partnering with, the depth of knowledge that these people have about the spirit, the production, it's incredible. It's incredible. So unfortunately not me. It's not a status that I have, but yeah, there are certainly some extremely skilled people that are working in the industry. Definitely.
I love it. I mentioned my family that has the vineyard, and I asked them, how did you learn how to do this? Assuming they had gone to lots of classes and everything. He looked at me and he said, YouTube. And I was, seriously? You learned how to make award-winning wine on YouTube? And he said, well, that was where they started. And then of course they went into and obviously wine production has become very different. I mean, they don't even always use grapes. A lot of it is they all work together. And I think that was one of the things that I was impressed with was, like this place, this property will grow a certain type of grape, and then another one will grow a different type of grape, and then they blend them together and they all work together. Do you find that with the agave is that, they all kind of work together and help each other out, or is it still pretty territorial?
No, absolutely. It's a really key point.
Now, agave is agave. I mean, it's not like all these different types of grapes that you have for wine, but yeah, you'd still, kind of work together.
Yeah, it's not so much the agave itself, it's more the tequila.
Okay.
So, for example, if you've got a brand, let's say Patron, for example, a very well-known premium tequila brand. If you've got Patron have got their own distillery. Okay, Hacienda Patron, beautiful, beautiful distillery in Los Altos, in Jalisco, in Mexico. But again, Patron, they buy from perhaps multiple other distilleries. They will buy their spirits for certain releases that they have, certainly for their aged tequila. So they will buy, let's say, ready to bottle añejo or extra añejo tequila from a completely different distillery to their own. But they will bottle that under the Patron label, you see? So it's not so much the agave, it's more the trading between distilleries, trading between brands of the tequila itself, especially the aged tequila, if that makes sense.
It does, because they are all slightly different, right? Because it's not that you just dump everything in and it is a little bit different. And I learned that from my cousins who are making wine. They said, yeah, you add a little of this, you add a little of that. And even just the time of year that you start working on things is going to change things. It's they love it. And I can see why, because it is such an intricate and detailed process and very much an art.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It's not a science. It's most definitely an art. One of the beautiful things about tequila, Deb, is you've got kind of two different production methods. You've got it's called the industrial method, where, again, very similar to what you said with the wine, people can produce extremely high volumes of tequila. They've got a higher yield from a smaller amount of raw materials used. That's called the industrial method. They'll use things like a diffuser, a mechanical roller mill, and you can taste it. You can taste it in the final
Right.
product. Okay. Then you've got the traditional method, which they'll use a stone wheel on a roller that kind of goes around and crushes the agave instead of a mechanical roller mill. They will, instead of using an autoclave to cook the agave, they'll use like a stone oven, which takes a significantly longer period of time to cook the agave versus steaming them in a metal container. And you can taste the difference. They get less yields, they get less products, but they get a much higher quality.
Higher quality of product.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what we're working on with our investors is always, 100% agave, the highest quality. There's no other sugars in there. That's what gives you the terrible headache the next day.
Right.
And it's all traditional production methods, small batch. So yeah, and ultimately that enables us, further down the line to sell to the big premium brands that demand the highest quality tequila. So yeah, couldn't agree more with what you said.
I love it. Well, oh my gosh, this has been so fascinating. I would love to tour just because I think that would be very interesting. But if someone says, "Hey, Samuel, we're interested," how do they find you?
I love people to reach out to me directly, to be honest. If people are on LinkedIn, they can find my profile on LinkedIn. I think I've given the link to you,
We'll
Deb.
put a link to that in the show notes.
They're more than welcome to connect with me and reach out. My email address is on the website. Otherwise, of course, they can make a general inquiry and speak with one of our consultants. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. So yeah, again, they can make a general inquiry with our consultants, or if they want to reach out to me directly, I'm more than happy to speak with them.
I love it. This really has been just absolutely fascinating. I don't think I'll probably ever talk with another person on this subject again. So you are truly unique. So this is so much fun. And it really has been absolutely fascinating. And I think it would be fun to have you on again, because this is something that, you'll find new things that you're doing and all sorts of things. And so we can definitely do that. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
You put me on the spot here, Deb. You told me this is going to happen.
If somebody says, "Samuel, in 2 or 3 sentences, tell me why we should do this."
Do you know what? I think I would probably keep it more personal than that, Deb. I think, for me, with my business journey, I think taking the step, if you've got an idea, if you've got, if you've been able to prove to yourself over however long that, you're able to perform at a high level in business, I think, it always comes down to 3 things. Okay. And this is what I'm going to leave people with. Always put the client first. Very cliche, blanket statement, but when you're in business, that's the number one thing you have to do to have a long-term, successful, sustainable business. Look after your clients, put the clients first. Number 2, build the right team. Put the right team around you. So important. Surround yourself with people who are ultimately better than you. That's what I always try and do. And finally, always innovate. Always try and improve, always try and look for new opportunities, ways to build on processes. Technology is a big one now, AI, all of these things. So I've rambled on a bit there, but I would leave people with those 3 things. Always look after the client first, build the right team, innovate.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Well, this really has been so interesting. I'm Deb Creer. I've been speaking with Samuel Gordon, the co founder and CEO of Gordon Private Whiskey Clients. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.